Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being with Henri Bergson and consciousness. So finally, consciousness today. I suspect I don't know, if you've read Bergson, maybe you know that this video on consciousness is not going to go in the direction that people probably expect it to go in a discussion on consciousness. This is one of those words that I have kind of avoided talking about in any depth up until this point, but I have kind of hinted at that I think the word consciousness needs a complete overhaul. I think the way it's talked about these days in philosophical and scientific circles, it's almost meaningless, the word, and people use it. People use it a lot, right? People are studying it, and I don't think anyone has a clear understanding of what they're actually studying. And I think the way it's defined, the way it's been treated, means that no one can get a clear understanding of what it is, because the term itself conjures up images of like a hazy kind of phenomenal sense, a sense that it's that there is something it's like to experience this, and that is probably the worst definition that I can imagine for consciousness. That there's this hazy kind of background awareness or sensation or phenomenal characteristic to my life that means that there is something it is like to be me. It's so ambiguous and so poorly defined. Not only can we not find it, but so everyone just assumes it's there. But however you try and understand it, explain it, assess where it comes from, with a definition like that, you're doomed to fail. And so we're stuck in David Chalmers' hard problem, which is actually an impossible problem. Because if the hard problem's right about consciousness, and if Nozick's right about what it is, then it's inexplicable almost by definition. So hopefully Henri Bergson will shed some light on this vexing topic. So the way I'm going to run this video is a little bit different from the ones I've done before. I've picked out 4 quotes which I think capture Bergson's take on consciousness, and then after each quote I'll isolate some of the important things that we can take away from the quote, and then I'll try and get a kind of a mini summary of what consciousness is. So to the first quote then, let's just jump straight in. Consciousness is but the characteristic note of the present, that is to say, of the actually lived, in short, of the active. Okay, so a nice short quote to start off with, but we can get something from this. It's the characteristic note of the present. The present then, right, is always sensory motor. So it's connected with movement, with action, with sensation. So we're down here in the world. That's where consciousness is. It's not in some reified internal space, right? It's not speculative. It's not disinterested or detached. That is how we tend to think of consciousness, right? Like a mind in addition to what's happening, a mind watching what's going on. We feel like, that's what I am truly in the deepest, innermost recesses of my being. I am this little consciousness which is surveying the world. Absolutely not. That is not where we're starting from. Consciousness is not speculative. It's not disinterested. It's not engaged. It is the exact opposite. It's in the world, in the action. It's in the present, that sensory motor present. So the first point really tied in with action. Bergson is tying in consciousness with action. Nice. The second quote, you might remember this from earlier when we talked about perception. Bergson talks about the way that perception is conscious or becomes conscious when it filters that image that it perceives. So in perception, we see the image, we perceive the object, but we don't perceive the object in its entirety, I guess. We perceive the object when we perceive the object, we've already kind of cleaved off the parts of it that don't interest me, that don't call to me, that don't invite me to action. And so at that point, when that's happened, that's when perception becomes conscious perception for Bergson. And here's the quote: "Conscious perception signifies choice, and consciousness mainly consists in this practical discernment." So that's just really crucial there. Conscious perception signifies choice, connecting consciousness with choice, which is also going to be a big part of Bergson's take on consciousness. But consciousness mainly consists in this practical discernment. That is what consciousness is here. Mainly consists in taking that kind of the raw information and seeing or apprehending what is relevant to us. So taking from that backdrop what is relevant to us, taking from the situation the objects that are relevant to us, the objects that I might need at the moment in order to do what I'm trying to do. And at the level of the object itself, I don't see all facets of the object. I see what I need from that object at that moment. That's what consciousness is, that practical discernment. That's a really nice word there. So consciousness arises here, not from perceiving a thing, not through perception, but from perceiving a thing in relation to an action. So again, connecting it with action. Now we've got choice cropping up as well, and we'll look at that more in this third quote. "Consciousness is the light that plays around the zone of possible actions or potential activity which surrounds the action really performed by the living being. It signifies hesitation or choice. Where many equally possible actions are indicated without there being any real action, as in a deliberation that has not come to an end, consciousness is intense. Where the action performed is the only action possible, as in activity of the somnambulistic or more generally automatic kind, consciousness is reduced to nothing. The consciousness of a living being may be defined as an arithmetical difference between potential and real activity. It measures the interval between representation and action." Right, there we go. So another crucial aspect, choice, that zone of indetermination. If you remember that zone of indetermination, we talked about that regarding practical freedom, which is what the brain does. The brain delays that process from receiving the stimulus to reacting to it, to responding. The brain its primary function is to delay that response half of the equation. And in doing so, it creates the zone of indetermination, which is where we encounter for the first time choice. We have the ability to not just to react automatically. And this means that an organism is conscious in proportion to its power to move freely, i.e. to separate stimulus from act. So consciousness, an organism is conscious in proportion to its power to move freely, to choose. And And again, there we're not postulating anything. We're not reifying consciousness in any way. We're not turning it into some kind of something that is along for the ride. We're not saying even that I am a little consciousness in the back here. All that's happening, consciousness becomes intense when you have that, when you have a range of choices open to you and you're deliberating. You're able to deliberate. If you're not able to deliberate, if you're not able to choose, if you act automatically in reaction to a stimulus, then you have no consciousness. You're not conscious, or you're less conscious, perhaps, to the point where if it's purely automatic, then consciousness is reduced to nothing. So that's a nice way of thinking about it here. Consciousness is defined as an arithmetical difference between potential and real activity. Measures the interval between representation and action. So it's about choice, whether you have choice or not. If you have choice, you have more consciousness. The less choice you have, the less consciousness you have. And just interestingly as well, this is not associated with having a nervous system and a brain. Bergson's clear on that, actually, in Creative Evolution. He says, although the only conscious organisms we are aware of do have nervous systems, I suspect, and brains, but Bergson's not committed to that. As long as nature is able to find a way to get choice into action, as long as you have choice and you have some, which implies movement, the ability to move, as long as you have that, then you have consciousness. And if nature can arrange that in some way other than nervous systems and brains, then that's fine for Bergson. That a being that is that has those basic elements is conscious, whether it has a brain or not. That's not the determining feature, because of course consciousness doesn't emerge from a brain. Okay, cool. So let me just rein that back in. I've gone off on a tangent again. Not associated with having a nervous system, brain. Only requirement, some form of choice introduced into the organism, into that. So we have reflex plus a voluntary movement. Cool. And this means that the continuum of consciousness stretches further than we might think. So we might wonder, how far does consciousness go down? And on this account, as long as an organism has the capacity to choose, so it's not automatic response, then it's conscious in some degree. And nicely, this also gives us a good reason, gives us good cause to not think of plants as being conscious. And I think that would be the sensible position. I don't think it's really reasonable to maintain that plants are conscious. But on this account, we can see why. It's not because they don't have nervous systems or brains. It's because they have no choice. They have no capacity to make choice, and they don't even have genuine movement. They don't. Some do, I think. Some do. But again, like this all works in. This all fits in with Bergson's description nicely. As long as you have that, as long as you have movement and the capacity to choose, then there's no problem saying something's conscious. But until it does, then there's a nice clear line that we can draw. Right. And just as a note, we also see a difference between instinct and intellect here. So the former to the extent that only the one action is possible, so it lacks consciousness. Instinct, to the extent that it is automatic, has no consciousness, whereas the intellect lives in the gap between the act and the idea. It's that kind of it's the bridge from the one to the other, and that we'll come back to later. We'll talk about instinct and the intellect in later videos, but it just kind of crops up here, makes an appearance here, something just to keep in mind as we go forward. Okay, the last quote from this first section, and this will connect consciousness in with duration. The subjectivity of sensible qualities is due precisely to the fact that our consciousness, which begins by being only memory, prolongs a plurality of moments into each other, contracting them into a single intuition. Now, this is such an important quote for me. This is like, this is my go-to when I'm thinking about consciousness. The subjectivity of sensible qualities, so that whatever it is that allows us to kind of feel our sensible qualities, that is nothing more than memory prolonging a plurality of moments into each other, contracting them into a single intuition. And that is just duration, right? So we come back to duration. Consciousness then is grounded in duration. And it's important to note that this subjectivity we're talking about, it's not a mysterious first-person awareness or first-person perspective or some kind of qualia, or it's not even the sense that there is something it's like to be me. It's none of those things. That awareness is that succession of psychic states, prolonged into each other, contracted into a single intuition. That's what awareness is. That's what consciousness is. It is those states. It doesn't arise from them. Those states don't create consciousness. As soon as you start thinking like that, you're reifying consciousness. You're turning consciousness into something which is being created, and somehow you're imagining it's like a kind of hazy field or aura that surrounds you, or that's within you, that kind of gives your experiences some kind of phenomenal sensation. That's not the case at all here. What consciousness is, it's just duration. Duration is consciousness. The succession of states, prolonged into each other, contracted into a single intuition. That is what consciousness is. We don't need to postulate anything in addition to that. If you can see your way clear to duration, if you can accept that duration is real, then consciousness it's already there. It's not something in addition to duration. And I think that's the real that's the key point here for me and Bergson's take on consciousness. He's not adding some new mysterious something. Something's not arising from anything. Even if you take the idea that consciousness emerges from the brain, it's kind of incoherent, because so if consciousness emerges, what is emerging though? You haven't explained anything. You're still left with just as big a question mark as you had at the beginning. That's why the hard problem is unsolvable, because we're not getting any closer. If we can say that consciousness arises from something, that still doesn't help us. We're still left with this hazy understanding of what consciousness is. It's some kind of phenomenal sensation or, subjective experience. These things are completely mystifying terms, and they shed no light on anything, let alone human experience. It just wraps all of human experience into this big black box and says that black box came from this. That's all it does. And this is why I find modern discussions on consciousness so dissatisfying, because even when what's being offered is kind of an explanation, it doesn't explain anything. We're still left with this strange hybrid creature, consciousness, that doesn't really belong in a physical world, but that we think we think we have to have. If we just drop that need to make ourselves a little Cartesian mind, capital M mind, then consciousness can appear naturally through natural processes. That's the beauty of this. Consciousness arises in living organisms naturally through the process of evolution. As organisms become more complex, as their awareness, their perceptions become more acute, they grow in complexity and are able to respond to the environment in unique ways, and choice comes to be, then you just get consciousness with it. That is consciousness. There's nothing more going on. There's nothing special being introduced into the picture. It's a big ask, because you are having to give up this notion that of there being like this little core I somewhere inside you, or behind your eyes, or wherever you think you are, that is kind of separate from everything else. But Bergson's throwing us straight back into the body, straight back into the world, and saying that awareness that you have, it's arising naturally from duration. It just comes out of duration. There is no special crystallized little ball of consciousness which is you. And I think that's what almost everybody's talking about when they talk about consciousness. They'll deny it. They'll say, no, we're not. That's a Cartesian mind. We're not into Cartesianism. But that's what they're thinking of. Even when they're thinking of something as ephemeral as the feeling that there is something that's like to be me. Even that is still reifying consciousness in some way. There's some little core phenomenal experience going on. There's an experiencer behind the experience. And as far as I'm concerned, that's just Cartesianism. So this is the first time I've felt that we're actually getting away from Cartesianism. I think that Bergson's on to something here, and it's just because he's grounded it in life, in the world. It's concrete. It's anyway. I'm kind of ranting. Also, in Introduction to Metaphysics, this was interesting when I read this. He says, and I'm just totally cherry picking this quote, but he says consciousness means memory in there. Again, tying it in, and that's not to say that we're not just substituting one mysterious term for another, but because we know what memory is. Memory is that it's when it's a natural function of duration. Again, it just emerges from duration naturally when you combine those successions, those successive states. You prolong them into each other, contract them into a single intuition. That's what memory is. We don't have to postulate something coming in from the outside. If we can get memory from nature, then consciousness arises in the same way. We don't have to throw in this kind of, first we don't have to talk about hazy, indistinct, something it's like to be something, qualia type things, and we don't have to introduce a little Cartesian mind anywhere. Okay, so let's see if we can get a hold on some of this. So elements of consciousness. There are two elements of consciousness: choice, the ability to separate your response from the stimulus, which opens up that zone of indetermination, and action, the ability to freely move. Those two things are consciousness. There's nothing more going on, nothing more we need to add. They don't give rise to consciousness. They don't create consciousness. That is what consciousness consists of. And if you're looking for more, you're looking for a Cartesian mind, I believe. And what consciousness is a succession of psychic states prolonged into each other and contracted into a single intuition. That, like I said, that's my go-to for this. It's as natural as duration, and duration is just how Bergson describes the world, the evolution of the world, of life, of the universe, and again, like really connected with physics. I mean, we're not saying anything mysterious when we say that things are fundamentally vibrations. Physics tells us this already. There's nothing, we're not postulating mysterious realms of energy or forces or anything, consciousness which is somehow out there that we're a part of. This is just physics, it's science. And if you've got that succession of states, the rest of Bergson flows from it, if you accept that time is real, i.e. that duration exists. So time is not just another spatial dimension. So yeah, this notion of consciousness, it's a simple, natural feature of Bergson's philosophy. What consciousness is not, it's not connected with speculative thought. It's not a detached, disinterested observer. And that is a trap that we really fall into very naturally, I think. We tend to pull consciousness away from actual engaged activity. We tend to think of it as something in the background. It's that feeling that there's something that's like to be me. It's that qualitative, it's qualia. It's an internal world which only I have access to. It's where my thoughts play out. This is all reifying consciousness. It's all turning it into a little Cartesian mind that we then can never explain. So it's got nothing to do with speculative thought. That is the intellect, and we'll come to that later. Nor is this anything to do with qualia, or first person this, or subject of that. There is nothing that accompanies perception and thought and feelings, sensation. There is nothing extra that accompanies those things. And that's what we have to lose. That's what we have to be prepared to drop if we're going to ever get clarity on consciousness and, more importantly, on human experience. Because this notion that we have, I think this mistaken notion that we're fundamentally this little conscious thing that is an awareness or a qualia-laden something or other lurking in the background, something that's feeling what it's like to be me now. That all, adding that to your picture it just distorts everything. It means that not only are we unclear about consciousness, but we're totally up the creek without a paddle when it comes to human experience as well, to your own experience, because you've created this thing, this this consciousness beast that you can't explain. You won't be able to explain it because it's fundamentally inexplicable, I think. And so I've just basically, that's what I've said here. Those things, qualia, first person awareness and stuff, those are red herrings, but they result from analyzing first person experience after the fact. So we have our experience, and then we think about it afterwards. We reflect on it. But what we reflect on is not the same as the actual experience itself. So when we reflect on our experience, we imagine, yes, it felt like something to be me during that time. Yeah, that red elicited this sense of redness, and that was different from the sense of blueness that I had later. But these are things that I believe we are adding into our reflection of first-person experience. The experience itself, I don't believe, had any of this nonsense. Ooh, nonsense. Getting serious words now. So if you think about your experience, I think about like a conversation with a friend. When I'm having that conversation, if I really put myself back there, it doesn't feel like anything. I don't have any feeling associated. There is no feeling in the background that, I'm having a conversation, or that the conversation doesn't feel like anything to me, because I am that conversation in that moment. There's nothing more going on. There is no I separate from the conversation. If that's true, and that's what I've been saying throughout the last few videos, especially when we looked at perception, that there is no little I doing the perceiving. It's just a function of how life has evolved. That this body, this animal, is able to reflect back objects, is able to have an awareness of other objects around it. That's doesn't require the postulation of a little mind doing the thinking. And the same thing here. When I'm having that conversation, I'm not separate from the acts that are going on. I'm not separate from the words that I'm speaking. I'm not separate from the words that I'm listening to. All that's happening there is those words are being spoken, and words are being listened to. I'm remembering them, right? The succession of states of events is still, time is real, so it's still connected with memory, which is connected with my life, but there is no subject hidden behind any of this. And that's really, I think, I'm kind of extending Bergson a little bit. I feel like he didn't go into this much detail on consciousness. In fact, his stuff on consciousness is quite sparse in his writings, I think. But this seems to me to be the natural way to take what he did say about consciousness. It's grounded in real lives, real actions, not this kind of detached little thing that is feeling something, that's experiencing anything, in addition to the event itself. And so we have that sensation that we think that that's what's happening because we've created it. We're putting it in there, into the experience when we reflect on it. I don't think it's there originally. Check it for yourself. You can be your own judge on that. Okay, so let's move on to the second part, in which we'll discuss whether consciousness is the effect or cause of movement in the brain, activity in the brain. So Bergson talks about this in Creative Evolution. The first and the second quotes, by the way, were from Matter and Memory, third quote was from Creative Evolution, and the fourth one was from Matter and Memory again. So this last section is all from from Creative Evolution, should you be interested in that. So, is consciousness the effect or cause of movements in the brain? If it's the effect, then the brain maintains consciousness. Consciousness is just a simple aid to action, lighting up the zone of indetermination. And this would mean there's a parallelism between psychical and cerebral states. They go follow hand in hand, but because the brain is kind of this is the emergent theory, right? The consciousness is just emerging from the brain. If you have activity in the brain, that generates the consciousness. The brain maintains consciousness. That's how Bergson puts it. But if it's the cause of movement in the brain, consciousness would be a more active, creative force, compressed in a kind of vice. And the more complex the nervous centers, the greater the choice opens up, i.e. the wider the vice opens, and the more freely consciousness is able to pass. Now, in that case, this would mean that we'd still have an interdependence between consciousness and the brain, but not parallelism. They're not locked in sync because one's creating the other, but the brain and consciousness correspond because both measure the quantity of choice available to an individual, the one by complexity of its structure, the brain, and the other by intensity of its awareness, consciousness. So that's a really, really important idea there. The brain, we see this brain states and conscious states occurring together, so that the theory then has been that brains produce consciousness. But Bergson's providing an alternative here, which doesn't say that, consciousness is influencing the brain. There isn't some, again, we're not reifying consciousness. There's not some conscious thing which is affecting the brain. All that's happening is that the two things are measuring the same thing. The two phenomena are measuring the same thing. They're measuring the quantity of choice available. And that's it. And that's what consciousness is. It's that quantity of choice. The more choice you have, the more deliberation you're capable of, the greater the intensity of consciousness. The less choice, the less. And there's nothing more happening. It's not that there's a consciousness which is deliberating. The deliberation is the intensity of consciousness. We really have to stop adding consciousness to the world if we want to ever explain it. So I really like that. That's a really important idea, I think, because we have to account for the fact that brain states they do mirror conscious states. But this does it without postulating the emergence of consciousness in some mysterious way from a physical object like the brain. And even though, so just be careful of this too, even though we described consciousness there as a more active creative force, consciousness is not a force. It's not a thing. We're not reifying consciousness. And by reifying, I don't just mean a physical thing, turning it into something physical. Obviously, that's not true. But I mean turning it into anything, a force, a sea of energy, any kind of substance, whether it's physical or non-physical, is reifying consciousness. If Bergson's right and all consciousness is duration, and it doesn't, there's nothing more going on than choice and movement, then we don't need to turn consciousness into something. We don't need to make it a force or a sea of energy, which we're all localized whirlpools of, right? We don't have to do any of that stuff. We don't have to speculate that far, because if we go that far, I mean, it's basically religious at that point, right? It's New Age. You can find 10 New Age beliefs that countenance something like that, and just as many religious beliefs, and they're all just as plausible if you start talking in terms like that. But for my money, Bergson really keeps his feet on the ground and locks this notion in and actually says something meaningful about consciousness. And that's what's just so missing these days. You've got wild theories and notions, and that's what they are. They're wild theories and kind of just not grounded in anything for me. So yeah, as like I said before, modern contemporary discussions on consciousness, just not interesting. I watched a debate between, wasn't really, kind of did turn into a debate between Bernardo Kastrup and Philip Goff? I think it's Philip Goff. And it just was just halfway through, I just thought, it's just not interesting. I'm just not buying anything that they're talking about. Discussing consciousness as Goff's a panpsychic. Panpsychic? Can I say that? He believes in panpsychism. So consciousness is kind of in everything, and Kastrup believes everything is consciousness. That's the ontological ground of everything. These kinds of discussions, I mean, it's almost like listening to two different believers in two different faiths arguing about God, what God is. It's just so detached from anything that it's so not grounded in anything. I just find it, yeah, maybe they're right, maybe it's true, but this is all just kind of wild speculation, and I just don't think we need to go there, especially when we've got this magical theory right here that explains it so nicely. Okay, so where am I? Let me hit you with another quote. I've got two more to go. So this quote, I'll talk about this quote. I'll give you the quote, then I'll talk about it, and then we'll look at the last one, and that should just about see us out. So the quote is this: "It is as if a broad current of consciousness had penetrated matter, loaded, as all consciousness is, with an enormous multiplicity of interwoven potentialities. It has carried matter along to organization, but its movement has been at once infinitely retarded and infinitely divided." The reason I threw this in is, first of all, note it is as if a broad current of consciousness, right? So consciousness is not a current, it's not energy, it's not flowing through anything, it's not a thing that can do that stuff. But if we think of it in this way, then we get some clarity. It's a metaphor. And what we see is that if we can think of it in this way, it's carried matter along to organization. So this is evolution, right? This is the evolution of life, becoming more and more organized, more and more complex. But that movement, that flow that we're talking about of consciousness, in this case, the metaphor, has been at once infinitely retarded and infinitely divided. Infinitely retarded, what Bergson's talking about there is plants, basically. So you've got this creative force, Bergson's calling it consciousness here, which is as if it's consciousness flowing through matter. Matter is evolving, and it's branching off into the plant kingdom where consciousness ends. There is no consciousness anymore. There's no choice. There's no genuine movement. There's no conscious perception going on. That's a dead end for consciousness. But down the other path, the path of animals, we also have, it's been infinitely divided in this path as well, but along two highways, instinct and intelligence. And here's my last quote. "Life, that is to say consciousness launched into matter, fixed its attention either on its own movement or on the matter it was passing through, and it has thus been turned either in the direction of intuition or in that of intellect. And so here we kind of get the big picture now. We're jumping ahead. We're going to talk about life and evolution a little bit later, but life, that is to say consciousness launched into matter, that's a nice way of thinking about this, right? Life is consciousness which is in matter. And again, consciousness is that's not the best way to put it, because it reifies consciousness. It does what I'm telling you not to do. But again, we're in the throes of this metaphor. Perhaps a better way to say it is life is matter that has become conscious, which gets rid of this notion of there being some kind of thing that, consciousness is like a force that's pervading the universe or whatever. But once you have that, it either turns in the direction of intuition or in that of intellect. And intuition degrades into instinct, becomes kind of locked in, focused in on itself, and the intellect is able to distance itself, to create some space between the body that I am and other things out there. And then we get the whole then what do we get? Then we get the sense that I am independent from everything else. And that's what leads to that's what's given us that practical edge. That's what gives us the ability to function as well as we do in the world. Because without the intellect, we wouldn't be able to do any of this. I've said this before. Bergson's not criticizing the intellect. The intellect is a key part in what we are. But if we want to understand the metaphysical reality, we have to go past that, because that is the intellect is a way of cleaving up the continuous whole that is reality. But anyway, I don't know. My explanation of this is kind of all over the place. But what I wanted to say is that this way of thinking kind of brings together consciousness, life, and freedom. And we see how they're all basically the same thing, all connected in the same way. And before you rush off and say, yeah, I knew it, life is consciousness. Consciousness is freedom. It's this force that pervades the universe, or we are localized instances of this greater ocean of consciousness, or consciousness is in everything. Everything's conscious to a little degree. Before we go down that path, just think about that. What is life? Life is not something. Life is not, it is by definition a process. It's not something that's doing anything. It's not something present in matter. It's not something in which we can emerge, right? Life is not, we don't reify life the way that we reify consciousness. So if consciousness is life, we're doing the exact opposite here. We're de-reifying consciousness. And the same with freedom. Consciousness is freedom. There's no way you can, if that's what consciousness is, if it's freedom, if it's just your choice, just the intensity of your deliberation or your capacity for deliberation, there's nothing to reify there. There's nothing to turn into something that we have to explain the origins of. It's like a really good version of panpsychism without the notion that everything's a little bit consciousness. Everything's a little bit conscious. And of course, all of these things, consciousness, life, freedom, we've grounded these all in duration already. So once more, consciousness launched into matter. Bergson's talking here about duration. Nothing more than a succession of psychic states prolonged into each other, contracted into a single intuition. And that's it. So really just tried to make consciousness real, grounded in the world, make it concrete. It's part of the animals that we are, the beings that we are, and it's not this extra thing added to the world. It's not something else we have to explain in addition to the fundamental metaphysical reality that Bergson's painted for us. All right, let's have a look at a summary. So this video is about consciousness. We looked at the elements of consciousness. We saw that there were two. There's choice and action. That's all you need. As long as you have an organism that can choose and that can act, that can move, then that organism is conscious. Nothing to do with qualia or a felt sense that there's something it's like to be that organism. That's all you need. And the essence of consciousness, to the extent that it has one, is it's a succession of psychic states prolonged into each other and contracted into a single intuition. I've said that how many times in this video? I can't even count. But that is duration, right? So everything ties back into duration. It's just a manifest form of duration. Consciousness is not qualia, first person, this or that. It's not even subjective experience. Those words are all red herrings. And it is not the effect of movements in the brain. This is emergence. Bergson wants nothing to do with that. Rather, it's the cause of movements in the brain, but not as a thing acting on the brain, but it's a cause in the sense that it's nothing more than duration playing out in the world, in an evolving organism. And that's it. Hopefully that has brought some clarity to the topic. For me, this is gold. This is just really, it's like a laser for me. It's just focused on consciousness and just cut through all of the mess really that I think surrounds the term these days. Before I go, I did want to just mention there were, like I said, I've done a lot of thinking about consciousness. I've written 3 articles which go into kind of more depth in some places, but in an attempt to explain consciousness. You may be interested in those. If you are, I'll put links in the description. There's a series of 3 that I wrote recently, which I think just they build on what I've talked about today, and just try and like I say, clear up some of the mystery that I think with some of the problems that we've gotten ourselves into with consciousness. The first article is called "The Qualia Delusion," so that's an indication of what's in store for you should you be interested in having a look at those. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next video.